Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Very warm welcome to each one of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day from wherever you might be tuning in. Thank you for being here sharp at start time. We're very excited with what we hope will be the first in a series of events that the Rights of River South Asia Alliance will be offering. My name is Abhairaj Nayak. I will be facilitating and moderating the session for today. And we have a program for roughly 120 minutes. We might end slightly sooner, and we hope to have a few mini breaks in that duration as well. Our focus for today, of course, is a very beautiful and very precious river called the Aghanashini. Maybe some of you who are attending this webinar have a relationship with the Aghanashini. Maybe you've seen the river or heard of it, or the name itself drew you in. And what we're interested in speaking about and learning about and co-discovering today would be how does one think about the rights of rivers or rights for rivers in the context of a very specific river, that is the Aghanashini, right? So the Rights of River South Asia Alliance, as the name indicates, is very interested about this larger discussion around rights for the more than human, rights for nature, rights for starting with animals, to plants, to landscapes, to rivers, mountains, the earth in itself, right? All of these are, of course, where the Rights of River South Asia Alliance drew its inspiration from. And our focus today is to move from the purely theoretical, purely abstract, purely imaginative world of thinking about rights of rivers to trying to appreciate, trying to discover, trying to inquire into what might it mean for a particular river, the Aghanashini, to be thought of as a rights holding entity. I'm not going to spend too much time by way of introduction, apart from alerting you to the fact that the reason we're having this event today, or the reasons, if I may say so, draw back both to the desire for the Alliance to connect with other collaborators, other researchers, other practitioners, community members. So in some sense, after a period of soul searching, research, coming together, the Rights of River South Asia Alliance is finally beginning to, in some sense, expand its reach and enhance its strength by connecting with other groups, other individuals, other communities, other movements who are also interested in rights of rivers. And we hope that this event and the many events that follow this will allow for us to come together, to align our interests, to collaborate, to learn from each other, even to get to know each other as friends, human beings, and collaborators. More specifically, this event is an opportunity for us to share some of the learnings from a series of projects that the Alliance supported over the past few months. So Hemavathi, who will be sharing a report today on the Aghanashini, a research report on the Aghanashini. Her project was one of 4 projects that the Alliance chose to support a few months back. We're very excited that all of the projects have been completed or are in final stages of completion. And today's event is an opportunity for us to share some of those insights with the larger world. So in terms of who we have participating in our session today, I think I'm going to go into slightly longer introductions in just a moment, but I want you to know that in terms of the structure we'll be following, my colleague Radhika from the Rights of River South Asia Alliance will be introducing the Alliance, what we do, what we are interested in, and spending a little bit of time with you so you understand the larger context behind this event and behind even the title, Rights of Rivers in a Situated Context. We then will have Hemavathi, who will be presenting her report, the findings from her report. If time permits, we might have a brief interlude or a moment after her presentation for one or two quick reactions. If not, we'll proceed straight off to two very special invitees for today, Vaishnavi Varadarajan and Prakash Mesta, who in different ways are intimately familiar with this beautiful river. And we hope that their comments will complement Hemavathi's or provide, in some sense, a larger backdrop to what Hemavathi has shared. And finally, we'd like to really open it up to invite folks who are attending this webinar to contribute with questions, with comments, with clarifications, and the like. So let me first perhaps just share a quick introduction to Hemavathi. Hemavathi is pursuing her PhD at the TERI School of Advanced Studies. She also founded ENACT, which is an online platform with the aim of bringing climate change related knowledge to a larger audience. She's extremely passionate about finding creative solutions to the climate crisis that we are facing. Her key areas of interest are corporate governance and climate change and climate education. And she wishes to use her training in law to uphold the rights of communities vulnerable to climate change and enable adoption of sustainability by companies in India. Right? And Hemavathi is also a colleague of mine at the Initiative for Climate Action, which is a nonprofit that was set up last year. And it's been my pleasure to be working with her and learning with her for a little over a year now. Vaishnavi Varadarajan is an activist and researcher who has worked on campaigns on the intersection of environment and gender justice. She's currently working as the South Asia Community Organizer for the International Accountability Project. She has worked as a research and programs associate with Dhatri Resource Center for Women and Children's Rights. She holds a master's degree in development from Azim Premji University, Bangalore. And just on a personal note, I met Vaishnavi at Azim Premji University many, many years back, and her energy and dedication to a project on the Aghanashini continues to inspire me to this day. When I meet teachers who are interested in experiential learning, or even when I'm speaking with students who are interested in social action projects, Vaishnavi and her group for many years back are always an example that I invoke. And finally, Dr. Prakash Nagappa Mesta is a coastal ecologist from Honavar, Karnataka. He's a member of the Karnataka State Biodiversity Board of the Government of Karnataka. His MSc thesis was based on comparative study on the biodiversity of bivalves in Aghanashini and Nagappa mudflats of Uttara Kannada district. He has worked as a research associate for the Center for Ecological Sciences Field Station at Kumta of the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He's been associated with the INCIOS INCOIS Projects Karwar, the Department of Marine Biology, KUPG Center Karwar, and NRDMS District Center Uttara Kannada District, right? And these, of course, are hurriedly put together bios. I'm sure all of our speakers for today have illustrious accomplishments and achievements outside of these. And I'll also invite each speaker to briefly introduce themselves just before it's their turn to make comments if they so wish. Now, I would, however, like to invite my colleague Radhika Mule. I don't have a fixed bio for Radhika, so I'm just going to go extempore and tell you that she's someone who I've learned a lot from, both in terms of rivers and in terms of how does one bring an artistic and aesthetic sensibility to ethical and political work, right? So I know that she has a whole host of prior experience and accomplishments and is involved with river-related projects as well. I'll invite her to perhaps share a little more about what's going on in her world. But first, let's hear from Radhika as an introduction to the RoRSA Alliance. Over to you, Radhika.
Hello, Abhay. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And we'll move on to the introduction for RoRSA. Please allow me the screen share. Yeah. So RoRSA, or Rights of Rivers South Asia, is an alliance, and we formed this alliance the reason for this alliance was because we all believe that the rest of nature, like human beings, also have an intrinsic right to live, to thrive, to survive, and to perform the ecological functions. And this need for rights of rivers is born from the very fact that we have millions of people who are vulnerable and who are mainly dependent on nature for their survival. With extractive practices, commodification, ineffective governance mechanisms, we have almost destroyed the ecosystems and the livelihoods of various communities who depend on them. And with the fact that we are seeing evidence of climate change impacts around us, this situation is going to be further aggravated. In this context, rights of rivers becomes a very necessary approach towards finding a balance between human anthropocentric needs and nature's need to survive, to flourish, and to thrive. So, understanding this background, we realize that there's a need for transboundary collaboration for rights of rivers, because as we all know, many of our major rivers in South Asia are transboundary. So an alliance was formed in March 2020, which came up from a dialogue. And since then, RoRSA has committed itself to represent the interest of free-flowing rivers, healthy rivers, and their dependent communities, specifically in South Asia. To give a wider scope of what we mean by rights of rivers or rivers' rights, we'll have to go back to the Universal Declaration of Rights of Rivers, which was put forth in 2008. And this declaration specifically spoke about few principles, which is that the river has a right to flow freely. It has the right to perform its essential functions, ecosystem functions. It has the right to be free from pollution, and it needs to feed and also be fed by sustainable groundwater aquifers. It has the right to maintain and thrive its biodiversity and to regenerate and restore itself. Taking a lead from this, we at RoRSA further are aiming at contextualizing this Universal Declaration of Rights within South Asia, and therefore today's presentation specifically focusing on Aghanashini River, where we are trying to contextualize this entire framework. Adding to that, we also believe in these principles where we say that the river has the right to be healthy. It has the right to maintain its continuity and not be fragmented with dams and projects. It has the right to be in her own spirit and not be tamed or controlled by human extractive practices. It has the right to be dam free. It has the right to protect its watershed. A river has the right to be free from interlinking projects which further lead to fragmentation. And river has the right to meander. As I said, river has her own spirit, has right to be with her own spirit. And ultimately, river has the right to meet her destiny, which is the sea or the ocean. So, in the light of this, we have rights of nature and rights of rivers, which is becoming a big movement globally. And it has come as a means to address legacies of human rights abuse, create a pluralistic legal system, and safeguard important ecosystems. So it's from being a theory, from being a framework, we are now seeing it become a tool or an instrument which can help us address various issues related to rivers, which we are seeing today. And here we have a map, a roadmap of what has been the journey of rights of nature in South Asia specifically, starting off with India in 2017, when river Ganga and Yamuna and Gangotri, Yamunotri glaciers and tributaries were given the status of legal persons. Then in 2018, we had a legal journey which spoke about how the entire animal kingdom has rights equivalent to that of a living person. In 2018, the same year, in Bhutan, the Royal Court of Justice of Bhutan created a green bench which has jurisdiction over environmental cases brought by any person as a trustee of nature. In Bangladesh in 2019, the Turag River was accorded the legal person status. The verdict was later made applicable to all the rivers, and directives on how to protect rivers were given to the government. In 2020, back to India, Sukhna Lake in Chandigarh city was given the status of living entity and also with rights equivalent to that of a person. In Nepal, rights of rivers is being considered, has been proposed in the new bills, and there are attempts to grant rights to Mount Everest as well. Recently, Pakistan has a rising and emergent movement against dams and diversions of rivers and recognizing rights to Indus River. Just to bring to the present context, the 2017 legal statement, which granted River Ganga, Yamuna, and the glaciers status of legal person, was later stalled in Supreme Court for various reasons. And maybe in today's presentation, we will try and address and look into them through the lens of Aghanashini. So, after looking at journey of rights of nature and rights of rivers till now, what we as RoRSA fundamentally believe in that free-flowing rivers will support our existence. They support our existence, and that is a way forward to reverse the biodiversity crisis which we are in today. For which we will have to follow the lead of indigenous and riverine communities, elevate women's leadership in various movements, communities, recognize and grant rights to river, radically reduce dam building, and address threats to freshwater ecosystems. Moving on, as RoRSA, we dream together to restore the health of all rivers where the wildlife and biodiversity are thriving, riverine communities live with dignity, and transform the current anthropocentric jurisprudence to that which respects and recognizes the intrinsic connections of human and the rest of nature. So, with this dream in mind, we are focusing on moving towards advocacy, education, campaigning, and bioregional governance as our milestones or paths through which we could reach up to our dream. And today's session is part of this effort. So, uh, we also believe in the fact that the journey of a river reuniting with the ocean is symbolic, that this is an unending cycle of free flowing, and reuniting is critical for planet's hydrological cycle and sustaining all life forms. So, rights of rivers is basically believing in this philosophy and believing in the fact that we all are bound to each other and are interdependent, and we cannot have a linear way of functioning. So with that in mind, we would request you all to join us to protect and advance rights of rivers in South Asia. You can sign up on our website link, which has been given over here. And with that, I hand over the platform back to Abhay and really looking forward to the presentations today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Radhika. That was wonderful. I think I really, though I've heard versions of that presentation many times before, it was great to get a chance to listen to that all over again. Yeah, I think I'd like to invite Ms. Hemavathi to get us into what is in some sense I think I don't want to necessarily prioritize one over the other. I think all components of today's event are equally important, or are multiple worlds within a world, if I may invoke the Zapatistas. I think we've given Hemavathi slightly more time than other speakers today, simply because we're quite excited that the report that she's been working on is finally ready for release. So we'll invite Hemavathi to go next. Hemavathi, maybe about 20 minutes for you. By way of just administrative announcements, since we have quite a few presentations today, I'll urge attendees of the webinar to use the Q&A box to drop your questions in as and when they come up. It could be a question for any of the speakers, and also please feel free to use the chat box functionality in case you can to sort of socialize a little bit with other participants, or to share any other information you might have. Okay, so over to you, Ms. Hemavathi. I think the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abhay. I'm not able to start my video right now. If somebody could help with that.
Sure. Let me check with our tech team if you can help Hemavathi start her video. I think she's having some trouble with that.
Okay.
There we go. Super.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. Okay, I just want to start off with some thank yous. Firstly, to RoRSA and ICA for giving me this opportunity to, work on this report. I think this has been an extremely interesting journey, because to write about a river that I haven't visited purely based on secondary research, it's been a great learning process, and one of discovery in terms of my research capabilities as well. I particularly want to thank Nagappa and Abhay for being great support throughout the journey. And I also wanted, there was one person we had a conversation with who gave loads of insights while developing the report, Ms. Gowda. She's from Bangalore Environmental Trust. I just want to thank her as well, and the RoRSA community for their support. I'll just start off with my presentation. So I can have some time for questions. Is my presentation visible?
Yes, it is, Hemavathi.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we've just heard about all the rights that the river can have, and I made an attempt to try and apply this in the context of Aghanashini. I want to make note of the fact that I would refer Aghanashini to as a she, because I think it is with this perspective that I also started writing the report. She is just like any other human being with loads of rights, and I, I mean, you'll see that tone throughout the presentation itself. But let me get started. Firstly, why Aghanashini was chosen? I think she's one of the last free-flowing rivers remaining in India. Free-flowing does not necessarily mean she is devoid of human intervention, but just the fact that um, communities have been living so well by her side, and she continues to stay as she was, hundreds of years ago. And there are loads of reasons on why we should continue to protect her and conserve her, and why she should continue to stay a free-flowing river. I'll get into that a little later, but when you talk about rivers and their productivity and um, just talking whether the idea of rivers itself, in terms of anthropocentric uh, perceptions, we always talk about development. What do you prioritize, development or conservation? And in such cases, I will share proof that rivers that have been considered, there's been human intervention and there's been development, it does not necessarily add a lot of value to humans as much as we think it actually does. So especially in terms of hydropower, so we just have to try to create a balance of what development actually means and what conservation actually means. And we have to ensure that Aghanashini remains a river which is like a no-go for any sort of human intervention. Absolutely. We should just let her be. She flows freely. She's been helping lots of local communities out, and we should just not touch her. That's all. One of the most beautiful wonders, just bringing this to light, is the fact that Aghanashini is one of those, there's so many falls across the flow of Aghanashini, but this concept of a moonbow is not very popular, and this is a very rare occurrence. Only around 5 rivers across South Asia does these incidences happen. It's basically when on a full moonlight, there's a rainbow during the night itself. It's absolutely beautiful, and this only happens at Aghanashini. And secondly, you have like the Yana caves. These are limestone rock formations very close to Aghanashini in the forest close by. Very big cultural significance for Hindus. And I mean, these are just some wonders. Like, this is right in the middle of the forest. Not a lot of, there's some research done, but don't know how this really happened. But they claim that it's about 800 years old. So, just sharing two wonders about Aghanashini. But moving on to the difference about how we understand what development means for a free-flowing river, especially when we consider human intervention through damming or hydropower. Sharavati is a sister river, flows in the same bioregion as Aghanashini, but she is dammed and Aghanashini is not. And in terms of biodiversity itself, Aghanashini has like double the variety in terms of fish species as opposed to dammed Sharavati. When you talk about livelihood of local communities, the value people actually derive from the river, there are 6,000 fisher folk who sustain or derive their livelihood from Aghanashini, whereas when it comes to Sharavati, it's just 223 people. And then both Aghanashini and Sharavati have their own estuaries, and you can see the very big difference in terms of their values and the space. Aghanashini estuary is definitely larger with 1,977 hectares, whereas Sharavati's is smaller. But you can see the difference in the value that is derived out of resources that are produced from Aghanashini itself, especially bivalves. It's like one is 1,000 and another is just 12 million. So if we do talk about developmental interventions to derive value and make river, say, a profitable entity, letting a river be is the way to go. Rivers are more profitable to humans when they're just as they are. So we've all previously understood what kind of rights rivers have, but then these rights are always under a constant threat. But again, human intervention in the name of development. One of this is basically a city which is about, which is so far away from Aghanashini. Aghanashini is in Uttar Kannada and Bangalore. The growing water needs of a city, to only fulfill the needs of a city water, there are plans to divert water from Aghanashini, which absolutely makes no sense. But this is like threatening the free flow of Aghanashini river itself. And not only this is a threat to free flow, but then the local communities already deal with water difficulties due to droughts and climate change, which are not necessarily taken into consideration while making these decisions or proposals. But these are the proposals that are threatening the rights or the free-flowing nature that Aghanashini has. The second one is basically our dams and hydropower projects. Not that there is a proposal right now, but constructing a dam and hydropower projects in the name of development again is the favorite for many governments, saying it'll provide a lot of people jobs. And this is also almost always branded as an alternative to fossil fuels. So saying that it is climate friendly, it is actually not. Construction of a dam itself and the functioning of the dam also results, it actually becomes a source of greenhouse gas emissions instead of actually being the right kind of alternative to fossil fuels. And this is along with a lot of social, environmental and social impact. So this is again a constant threat that exists as long as Aghanashini remains free flowing. Next, one of the rights is the fact that rivers actually perform essential functions on their own, have their own functions to perform within the ecosystem. One fact is flooding, which actually helps a lot of local farmers who live close by, which, floodplains, and then nutrition is back into the soil, farmers sow in seeds. There's this, an yearly process that happens. However, because of climate change, flooding happens so frequently, and it threatens apart from threatening the livelihood, it threatens the lives of the local communities itself. And secondly, we talk about sediment deposit. When a river flows, it deposits sediments, as it flows. And right now, that again is being threatened by excessive sand mining. People, as usual, have become more greedy, want to make profits. So excessive extraction of sand has been happening across Aghanashini, which we need to take into consideration while trying to come up with solutions. Food and water security. Aghanashini, like I said, we should perceive Aghanashini as an ecosystem, and the food, this provides food and water security, not just to humans, but various animals across who live by her side. So these are her functions, and the moment we start to interfere, we'll be stopping her from doing what she's supposed to do. So that's, again, human intervention that is threatening all Aghanashini perform her essential functions. Thirdly, it's about not being polluted. Right now, the level of pollution from Aghanashini is restricted to domestic waste, the runoff from agricultural lands. Some parts of it is threatening the biodiversity, but in more pollution or excessive pollution will lead to threatening more biodiversity that lives by her. And I'll get to this a little later, but one study conducted by IISc looked into bioindicators about the cleanliness of the water itself. And they found insects, basically, that are very sensitive to pollution. So if the river is polluted, those insects would be absent from Aghanashini itself. But since they're present, it is an indicator of the fact that Aghanashini still remains to be clean to a certain extent. However, what does this mean for climate change? Pollution, the more a river is polluted, generally, to a certain extent, rivers also act as carbon sinks. They absorb carbon. However, when they become excessively polluted, they become a source of carbon emissions, and not just carbon, but methane emissions, and which is very much far, more dangerous than carbon dioxide itself. So if we don't want Aghanashini to become like a source of climate change, a cause of climate change itself, we need to ensure that she is not polluted at all, or we work towards ensuring that she becomes more cleaner. Next part is the developmental threat through pollution itself. Initially, there was a thermal power plant that was proposed, and because of the protests of the community, and this was proposed by the central government, the state government couldn't make up its mind as to whether they want to proceed with the projects. And there were a lot of religious leaders who supported the protest, local communities saying that Aghanashini, they should, the proposal should not go ahead. However, this proposal changed to a gas development plant. And in this particular case, the project has been shelved, which basically means it's not active, but the government hasn't necessarily terminated or canceled the project. So this remains as a sleeping, I call it a sleeping threat, because there could be any point of time when the government could just like get up and say, I want to implement this project. And the local communities will have to start having conversations with the government again. Right now, the Tadadi port proposal is something that has been delisted, but this is a very recent port proposal that was made by the government. And one interesting fact that I realized on, reading the documents about public hearing and environmental impact assessment is again that went back to the arguments of development versus conservation, and how the government always tried to convince people about the benefits that such a project would bring to the local communities. And one particularly interesting argument was that the local communities, for a lot of other livelihoods that they pursue at Aghanashini, say for example, rice farming or fisheries, they don't get the necessary support, so their incomes are really low. So at that point of time, they have to make a choice between destroying Aghanashini over deciding whether to make more money to sustain their own lives. And there have been people who, even from the local community, who sort of supported the project, saying, I'll probably get benefits. And again, farming and every other activity of theirs are being threatened by climate change. So this is something we need to keep into consideration, because while we ensure that Aghanashini remains free-flowing, local communities also need the support they can get to, ensure that their livelihood and lives are not threatened. Biodiversity at Aghanashini. Firstly, I'd like to point out the Aghanashini estuary itself, the one that I mentioned. It is valued about 1,092 million. Right now, this is a picture from Google Maps, but this proposal was made by the Indian Institute of Science, talking about making Aghanashini estuary a biodiversity heritage site. This was basically because of the value Aghanashini estuary has for a lot of people, and just about its own biodiversity, which is absolutely, absolutely rare. This proposal was divided into two parts. One was the fact that we needed to protect the mangroves, and there was also a small proposal about them, getting protection under the wetlands, Ramsar Convention. However, it hasn't seen much progress. And second is the bivalve, which has been, super helpful and super empowering for the women in the area, and supporting them in many ways. So these two parts are separately proposed for the biodiversity heritage site. Next is this, I think this is a very fascinating story for me in terms of the picture you see at the background are called Myristica swamps. These are present in the Western Ghats on the shores of Arabian Sea. The left side, what you see is called the lion-tailed macaque, which is an endangered species. On the right side, you see a fruit called upage. Now, what happens is Myristica swamps are present across Aghanashini, and they produce this fruit called upage, which is consumed by lion-tailed macaques, and they disperse the seedlings and promote the spread of Myristica swamps itself. So there's this, triangular ecosystem and relationship that is created. So even if we interfere in one of them, the balance will be destroyed, threatening the other two sections as well. And one of the biggest threat is basically the value for upage. It has a lot of value, and then there's been unsustainable consumption of upage by human beings, which is actually threatening the population of lion-tailed macaques and decreasing the area where Myristica swarms are present. How has Aghanashini remained a free-flowing river? It's simply because of the local communities. They've been fighting for her for a very long time, and this is just because of their fights, the very long fights, very difficult fights with all the authorities that have been proposing human intervention through her. Okay. But when we talk about rights of rivers, we also need to consider the rights of the local communities and their right to subsistence. One part is the fact that there's a part of Aghanashini which is considered a sacred grove, where trees are absolutely not felled, and there's the god Babru Lingeshwara, who is revered, and they make a point. They have rules to protect the forest that way. So these cultural practices have helped Aghanashini remain the way she is. Secondly, it's the fishing communities who've been deriving their livelihood. Some of them are called Halaki Wakalikas, there are some called Namdharis, and these are especially women. In the photo, you can see two women. They actually diving into the river itself to collect bivalves, and the production, and there is an increased consumption, and the production also has increased. This is considering the demand, and right now these bivalves even get exported to Goa most of the times. And the third is rice farming. We have something called Kagga rice and Sanaki. Kagga rice is like, a salt tolerant variety, and this is black in color. People who've been farming Kagga rice are in difficulty, especially because of the lack of demand and the perception of people about rice itself. Now everybody wants their rice white and shiny, so the demand for Kagga has reduced, despite the fact that it has immense nutritional benefits itself. Sanaki is again, Sanna in Kannada means small, so it's like very, smaller variety of rice, which is grown only on the hilltops. This has decent amount of demand, but people still have an alternative occupation or something else to support them if they're, growing Sanaki. Way forward, I think I want to answer this in two parts. Why should we continue protecting Aghanashini, even if it's not for the rights? Is firstly because of climate change adaptation. Climate solution should always include rivers as a part of, it, especially because freshwater ecosystems are super crucial for maintaining balance. for livelihoods of the coastal communities, the riverine communities. And when it comes to, this is not just adaptation in terms of nature, but developing community climate resilience and adaptation for the riverine communities becomes very crucial, and rivers play a very important role, especially in a world where temperatures are rising. Another part, I answered why. Now, how do you protect Aghanashini? Apart from rights of rivers, this is something we need to complement it with, is the bioregional governance. I speak about this idea of how we have linear and spatial integration of governance itself. When you're talking about linear integration, we want authorities who govern Aghanashini right from the source to the point where she needs to see. Aghanashini moves across 3 taluks. So taluk level governance needs to be clubbed. This would be linear integration. It's not like people in Kumta or the taluk level authority of Kumta takes care of only the part of Aghanashini that flows through their jurisdiction. They have to collaborate and work with other taluks as well. And when you talk about spatial integration, like I said, Aghanashini is just not a river. She's an ecosystem, a bioregion, which means you talk about protection of, sustainable consumption of upage, or protection of lion-tailed macaques, or ensuring myristica swarms, are not reduced in number, protecting the mangroves, ensuring sustainable bivalve production, right? So every part of this has a different authority, and all these authorities need to come together. The Wildlife Authority, the Biodiversity Authority, the department that takes care of water, all of these need to come together to ensure that Aghanashini as a whole is protected. So that is where bioregional governance plays an important role. And the last thing is the solution. We bring in rights of rivers and complement it with bioregional governance to ensure that Aghanashini stays alive and she's free flowing in the face of climate change. That's it.
Thanks so much, Hemavathi. I know you also had a evocative mini video, so maybe at some stage today we can come back to that. But I think your presentation was right on the dot in terms of time. So thank you and well done. Let me now invite Vaishnavi to, I think, give us her comments and her own insights from her work with the Aghanashini. Over to you, Vaishnavi.
Thanks, Abhay, and thank you to the team of Rights of River South Asia for having me. We've had to have me here as a part of this very important discussion. Hello, everyone. I'm Vaishnavi, and today I'm going to be talking about the unique ecosystem of the Aghanashini estuary and the different ways in which communities living around the estuary have been protecting the rights of the river and estuary in the face of multiple development threats. So just to give a context, my association to Aghanashini, my association to Aghanashini goes back to 2016 when I got the opportunity to work there as a part of a field project during my master's at Azim Premji University. At that time, this was around this was from December 2016 to March 2017. At that time, there was a proposal for a port, a very destructive port that was going to come in the region. And this was in its final stages of the clearance. And there was a very strong local campaign in the area, which was led by researchers at IISc, CPR Namati, and stakeholders from various community-based organizations. And this sport was actually proposed in 2009. This was supposed to be a multi-purpose sport for handling and transporting iron, coal, and steel. The reason that communities were actively coming to oppose this sport was because of the massive environment changes that this was going to bring out. So while the EI had talked of this being a seaport, this was actually an estuarine port, and it was going to be built inside the estuary by like shifting the mud flats and destroying the mangroves in the region. So this campaign had come together to kind of protect the unique ecosystem at this point of time when it was going to face massive destruction. It was also important to understand the impacts of an estuarine port, because an estuary has a connected ecosystem where the river systems in the sea where the river meets the sea, and there are a lot of benefits of an estuary to the community in the region. So this port was proposed on around 1,400 acres of land in this village called Nushikutti. And here, this land was actually traditionally, sorry, losing my track, but when we had kind of been here, at that point of time, we were engaging with the communities to understand what their perception of the port was. And we found that, as Hemavathi had mentioned in her presentation, that there were many groups, there were many people in the community that were supporting the port coming in. Now, the reason behind that was that there had been a history of development interventions in the area which had already displaced communities from their traditional livelihoods and knowledge systems. So even before the port had come, there had been a lot of damage that had already happened. So the land where the port was proposed had actually been acquired in 1970s by Karnataka State Industrial Development Corporation. And this land was traditionally known for a unique form of paddy cultivation that used to take place in this region, through which, so this particular form of cultivation was very unique to this region. These were fields that were dependent on the estuaries. These paddy fields were constructed on the embankments of the estuary, and the paddy that, as Hemati talked about, this was a very unique variety, a traditional variety of paddy indigenous to the region. And in these Ghazni lands, they followed a cooperative farming system where farmers used to, there were a large group of farmers who used to share, work together. They co-owned the farm, so there were no landlords. They used to share their returns with each other. And how the farming used to happen was that during high tide, the water from the estuary used to enter the fields through these drainage channels known as kodis. And there were these wooden sluice gates that were attached on the corners of the field. And the farmers had the knowledge of how much water to take in, controlling the flow of the water. And they had also planted mangroves on the side of the channels to prevent erosion from happening. And over here, traditionally, farmers and fishermen used to work together. So after the farmers would, cultivate their paddy, they would allow fishermen to come in and fish in the paddy fields as well. So there was traditional fishing that used to happen in these Ghazni lands. But it was around 3 to 4 families would come and practice in one kodi. So how they would do so is they would attach these nets called ganti wale on the mouths of uh, the embankments. They would also use a net called goru bale, which to fish inside the kodis. And the mangroves that were planted by the farmers were also very nutritious for the fish that were grown in the estuary. The nutrients from the mangroves used to go into the estuary, and prawns and crabs used to come with the water inside and stick to the roots. So they would collect the prawns from the roots. So it was a very interconnected system of farming and fishing, which was solely dependent on the water from the estuary and had been going on for years over there. This somehow changed in 1973 when the Karnataka government uh, introduced this scheme through which they converted the embankments into permanent stone dams. So these were earlier earthen bunds, and they converted into stone dams to prevent salt intrusion from coming in. Uh, but while they did this led to just like this small act of just putting stones on the earthen buns. It created such massive impacts because after they removed, in this process, they removed the mangroves that were growing on the fields and the wooden sluice gates. So because of this, there wasn't enough drainage for cultivation to happen. So then the Kagga fields started, the Kagga farmers were not able to grow Kagga very well because the Ghazni lands were now unfit for cultivation. So in order to make money, many of these farmers then started to auction out the fishing rights. So this cooperative system of farmers and and fishermen where they used to work together now completely changed. And there was a battle between the farmers and fishermen in the district court and the high court. In the district court, the farmers won because this was a battle. This was the fishermen went to the court to kind of file to demand their rights of fishing in the Ghazni lands, and the farmers won the battle because they had a very strong lobby, but the High Court still defended their rights to fish. This then more changes came about after the Blue Revolution in the 1980s. So at this point of time in India, there was a trend of aquaculture ponds replacing traditional agriculture with the increase in demand for seafood, and there was rapid expansion of aquaculture along the Karnataka coast. So what happened was that these Ghazni lands that were already not being cultivated as much were now being leased out to aquaculture companies. And this led to further pollution of the estuary because there were a lot of chemicals used in these shrimp farms. And that was in many ways destructive for the industry itself because there were, after some time, it was found that there were diseases in the prawns, and that led to kind of the decline of the aquaculture industry in the area. So at this point of time, like after aquaculture went, there was Ghazni lands were even more unfertile. Like we couldn't even uh, go back to cultivation. So they just, even now, if you go there, you'll see many of these abandoned lands which are just lying fallow. Uh, and there were multiple, so because of that, that has also kind of allowed various development threats to come in the region. But it's important to understand that it wasn't always fallow, it was made fallow by these changes. uh, so later there was a caustic soda factory that came here that damaged the land further. So in the because of these various threats, Ghazni collectives did come together to oppose some of these projects, like the thermal power plant that was proposed had a strong opposition from the Ghazni collectives. There are some Ghazni collectives still working in the region to preserve this farming, and there are 2 Ghazni lands that are, I think, operational, and they're trying to bring it back. They're trying to impose fines on Kagga farmers so that they continue Kagga farming, so that they don't cultivate other forms of rice. And there are various groups that are also working towards preserving this right now. Um, in terms of the gendered impact of the displacement, the women who were working in the Kagga fields are now, working as bivalve collectors on the mud flats. And even that is a threat because there has been a lot of shell mining and sand mining in the region, which has reduced the availability of shellfish. The women who were from the Hakkali Vokkaligal community who were once farmers, since they didn't have land rights, even they were displaced from the Kagga fields. However, even today, they continue to sing songs of the land and working in Kagga fields, and that is their way of conserving the traditional knowledge. Most of the men from the fishing families today work in commercial fishing in the seafaring boats at the Tadadi port. Many still fish using the nets on the channels of the Ghazni fields. Some families are also, fishing families are also collecting prawns and crabs from roots of mangroves that were planted there by the Forest Department in 1990s. So despite that, the mangroves that are there are also declining, but as what Hemavathi also talked about, there are these cultural systems of protection where there is this sacred grove island there called Masur Kurve, where the fishing communities have been preserving it in the name of a deity called Babru Devaru, which is a local name of the deity. Here they don't, they don't even wear shoes when they go to this island, so they take off their shoes here and travel by boat over there. And this has also been a way of protecting the mangroves. There have been various petitions filed by groups in the region. So the Center for Ecological Sciences of IIC, the IIC Field Station, has proposed to the Karnataka Biodiversity Board to declare the mud flats and the mangroves as biodiversity heritage sites. The Bivalve Collectors Union has also been submitting petitions to declare the estuary as a critically vulnerable coastal area. And it is due to these campaigns, and it is due to the struggles of the community that today the Tadadi port got delisted. There were multiple reasons behind this. The forest clearance for this didn't come because of the protection of the mangroves in the region. But a large factor behind that was the coming together of different groups. There were multiple stakeholders, there were civil society organizations, researchers who came together to disseminate the ecological and legal information and continuously file petitions and challenge this port. And it was a long struggle that led to this success. But despite that, there are still challenges that continue. There are multiple ports that have been proposed in other rivers around Aghanashini that could still threaten the area. And there's also sand mining that is growing in the region, and there are fishing collectives currently filing a case against it. So, I mean, it is that the Aghanashini has been through a lot. It has been through multiple changes, but it still continues to flow freely. And the reason behind that is this struggle by the communities and the different ways in which they have been reclaiming their rights and upholding their rights of the river. And I think that is something that has till now preserved the estuary as it is, and will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vaishnavi. I think, again, evocative is the word that comes to mind. And Really appreciate you limiting your comments to the time available. I think there are many stories that you gave us a glimpse of. Let me now invite Dr. Prakash Mesta, our final speaker for today, for his comments. Over to you, sir. Prakash, you'll have to unmute yourself. We are not able to.
Yes.
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening to you. Please go ahead.
My presentation on how the people participated in the Aghanashini, protecting the Aghanashini. Aghanashini is a high productive ecosystem. People of Aghanashini sharing their ecosystem services in a traditional method. They have several regulations. Since time immemorial, they are using the methods how to protect the Aghanashini estuary and sharing their benefits. Aghanashini, the map showing the location of Aghanashini, the production of Aghanashini, only harvesting without any investment. Some changes in harvesting technology, but the people are harvesting without putting any investment. Our team is Energy and Wetland Research Group and tried to understand the fragile ecosystem of Aghanashini. Several researchers done different types of research, and there is a fragile ecosystem difficult to understand. Then we used GIS as a tool to understand the Aghanashini and prepared a different layers of what type of peoples are there, people to production and different services provided by the Aghanashini. The type of gears and crafts, traditional ecosystem, estuary and agriculture technology. These are the very interesting subject. And the service provided by Aghanashini is enormous. Aquaculture, shells, salt production, fishery, bivalve production, marketing. There is big. Several peoples are depending on that services provided by the Aghanashini. Even fodder they are collected, firewood they are collected. Then ferry services are there. There is dry fish industry. There is big production, dry fish production, sand, shell mining, kagga production, and there are several different types of people, stakeholders linked with this Aghanashini. We classified the fishery stakeholder, user community, local communities indirectly connected to the estuarine production, aquaculturists, fish farmers, tourists, government department, NGO research, and prepared a mapping of natural resources of Aghanashini, evaluate the production of the tangible goods from the Aghanashini estuary, and find out the total economic value of the resources from the estuary. Aghanashini surrounding, there are one town, Kumta town, and 44 villages. The population density of Aghanashini surrounding villages is 9.74 per hectare. And the production, salt pans production, natural aquaculture production, and shrimp farm production. The salt only, there are 3 salt pans. They earn 5 crores per year. Shrimp culture, and fish prawn gajini production. Just we evaluate the what's in the Aghanashini. In fishery, there are different types of community. There are 5, 6 type of community with having a different technique and different. They're using different craft and gaze and fish landing centers. 21 fish landing centers in the estuarine region, and the income is 12 crores per year. Fishery it's a big sector in Aghanashini estuary. There are prawn fishery, crab fishery, bivalve fishery, and shellfish and finfishes. There are fishery of different dry fishing is also fish drying is also big, having the big community. They have the production communities and also shell mining and bivalves collection also already. There are 5 to 6 commercially important bivalves. There are several bivalve different species, but commercially important 6, 7 bivalve species are there. Even crab, there are 34 different species, but commercially important only 3. 3 only they harvest and market. And the production, sand mining production, fodder production, everything we evaluated the what is the cost and benefits from these resources. There are mangrove patches. We also calculated the carbon sequestration and number of the potential places of mangrove potential area, mud flats are evaluated. This total economic value of Aghanashini in 112.16 crores per year, and total value of tangible goods provided by Aghanashini estuary is 142.98 crores per year. This message we taken to local public people when the port is announced. Then we conducted and contacted the local fishermen. During our research field visit, several people, uneducated, illiterates, I think they are illiterates, asked our team, what is the port and what happens and where it's come, what about our future? We can't understand and we not answerable. Then we contact the traditional local people. They have a traditional method of community structure. Headman is called as a Yajamana and Budvanta or Badvanta. Different community have different Yajamana, different the pockets of villages having different types of culture practices. We contacted them and discussed with them. Then actually the coordinating the challenges of coordinating with multiple stakeholders is very difficult, because fishing community, agriculture community, salt makers community, and other several shell mining community, then sand mining. These are the everyone depending on the estuary. So it's difficult to coordinating with all, bring them in a one place it's a very challenging. But the Energy and Wetland Research Group headed with Dr. T.V. Ramchandra and MD Subhash Chandra and their researchers done a wonderful work. Contacted every person and different NGOs and people, then told them what is the production of we show that production of Aghanashini, value of Aghanashini tangible goods provided by the Aghanashini. And then the challenging job is we mapped, once again we mapped, use the GIS technique, where is the shell estuary and rice production area, where is the aquaculture area, where is the shell mining area, where the fishermen settlements is there. We visited classified as high salinity region, medium salinity region, and low salinity region. Then the fishermen, there are in Uttar Kannada 10 different types of fishermen community. The maximum fishermen community, types of community found in the Aghanashini estuary. And the classification different community, zone wise, salinity zone wise, we classified which are the places of community settled and what are their activities, how they depend on the Aghanashini estuary, and how to interact them with our information. And suppose the estuary and river mouth people are unaware about the low salinity region of people and their activities. Even there are several conflicts between them. Taking to them all in one single road is a very difficult. But when we told the message of protecting the Aghanashini, then everyone gathered and we conducted stakeholder meeting. And we collected where the Harikantra community are settled, which are the village is dominated by Harikantra fishermen community, which are the dominant villages of Ambiga fishermen community, and what are the Dalji fisher communities, and agriculture community, Halaki Wakaliga households where they settled, and which are their production, how the villages or estuary, depending on estuary region. In Patagar communities, they are the estuary and agriculturist, traditional agriculturist having lot of traditional knowledge on agriculture, estuary and agriculture. They have some technology. It's just like estuary and engineering technology. They have lunar movement connected, linked with agriculture to a lunar movements, tides, and what is the sluice gate about. They have lot of knowledge. We also documented that, and other communities are other communities like in the estuary region, that Mukri communities and Ager, Haller, Uppar, several communities are directly depend on the Aghanashini estuary region. We conducted the process of people's participation, identification of the stakeholder, degree of dependency, the joint program. We conducted joint program, meeting with the stakeholders, self-help group, women's group, and fisher women's group. We discussed with them how much depend on their lives on Aghanashini estuary. Then we conducted the stakeholder meeting, plan in a good way, and we contact the several peoples, NGOs. They've also contribute their services to protect the Aghanashini estuary. Thank you, sir. Hello. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prakash Mesta. That was, I think, just what we needed to get the full picture of what is, I think, a very complex, very beautiful, very, some senses fragile, but also in some senses rich ecosystem. So We've had our 3 presentations. We've also been together for about 80 to 82 minutes. And I know that that's a lot of screen time. I'll now invite you to just, if you have been fully glued into your screen, to take maybe a few seconds to just look around your room or look away from your screen, maybe even get up and stretch a bit. We now have some time to actually get into a component where we have something akin to a discussion. We'll have the opportunity to have our panelists respond to direct questions as well. If you haven't yet done so, and if you do have a question or a comment, please do add that into the Q&A box or the chat window. We could also, I think, depending on what is technologically possible, get folks who want to comment, enable them to actually unmute and speak. So if you'd like to speak verbally, please do use the raise hand function. I think that might be possible for you to just indicate that you would like our team to reach out to you and allow you to unmute. During the course of the webinar today, we've had many of our supporters, friends, inspirations in the room. I can't acknowledge all of them, but I did see Nirmala Gowda here as well. I think Hemavathi did mention her and her contribution to the project. In my own conversations with her as well, I've been blown away by how familiar she is with this river and what she's contributed to my own appreciation of this river. I see, of course, Dr. Chiranjeevi Bhattarai is here with us. He's a vital part of the Rights of Rivers South Asia Alliance, a founding member, one of our main sources of energy, very tireless worker for rivers and their rights from Nepal. I also noticed Dr. Manu Bhatnagar is with us. Thanks, Dr. Manu Bhatnagar, for joining us. He's a member of a group where many of us in this conversation are also interested in bioregionalism, and Dr. Bhatnagar has been doing some great work, including with mapping out contexts that include rivers. So thank you for being here. I see some old friends as well. Thank you, Pranavendra, for being here. Thank you, Vani, for being here. Thanks, Vasudha, for being here. Hi, Yan. Thank you for being here. So I've just mentioned a few of the many names that my eye has scanned through the course of today's webinar. I think earlier I also saw Vishwanath and SP Ravi, who both are well regarded, and their work in the river and water space has been useful for many. Okay, so just before I open it up, I want to go back to the titling of this event, right? Rights of Rivers in a Situated Context, right? And for those of you all who might be trying to remember what rights were mentioned by Radhika and then by Hemavathi at the first 2 of the presentations, without necessarily being exhaustive, some of the rights that came up were the right to flow, the right to perform essential functions, the right to be free from pollution, the right to feed and be fed by sustainable aquifers, the right to native biodiversity, right? I mean, when you talk about 23 varieties of bivalves or crabs, not sure which of the 2 Dr. Mesta referred to, even if they're not commercially viable, they are native biodiversity in that sense, right? And at least the Declaration on Rights of Rivers includes a right to native biodiversity and the right to regeneration and restoration, right? Even the Kagga rice is arguably a right to native biodiversity. So the hope here is that all of us now know enough about the Aghanashini, its history, its geography, its cultural context, and some of the politics around this river, to begin to actually interrogate or appreciate what is possible when we talk about rights of rivers, right? And the Alliance as well is quite comfortable with a, a polyvocality, if I wish, many different views to what rights mean, right? We don't necessarily want to limit our understanding of rights of rivers to a legal sense, or some would say a Western Eurocentric sense of rights, or even the Declaration of Rights of Rivers, right? In a sense, we continue to be open with regard to what we think of as rights of rivers. So with that said, let me now check on who would like to speak. Maybe I'll also request my colleagues to help me identify whether there are friends who have either made comments or have raised their hand. Just so you know, there's an entire village of RoRSA members who have been supporting with many parts of this webinar, right from design to publicity to the tech to monitoring the chat box to inviting speakers, and I'm hugely grateful to all of them. I think I can just very quickly try to name some of those who are here. Aisha, who's helping a lot with our tech work, and Radhika, of course, you met, Shrishti and Siddharth and Avli. Of course, Shantanu, who will be doing a formal vote of thanks later today as we close out. Namrata, who's played a key role in design, right, amongst many others, including Dr. Chiranjeevi, who's here as well. Okay, so I see Kanishka having a comment in the chat box that's immediately coming to my eye. Kanishka, maybe if you can, would you like to unmute and raise your question? And I'd also invite you to briefly introduce yourself because it'll be a good opportunity to further one of the goals of our session of getting to know each other, if ever so slightly. Yes, Kanishka.
Yeah. Oh, hello, hi, everyone. I'm a PhD scholar from IIT Bombay. I'm doing my research on Kosi floodplain, and basically I'm trying to understand how policies and governance process, flood policies and flood governance process in Bihar, especially in one district, how does it recreate or create relations of marginality and vulnerability? So my question is regarding a more broader context when we talk about river, and especially in context of flood, because a lot of interventions that are made on river are either on the name of flood control or management, or in the name of power generation. So we have had, I mean, a lot of critique of structural interventions on flood, and how taming the flood not only uh, changes the reverse morphology, but it also changes the local community and their relationship with nature and rivers. So, but one question that keeps bothering me, and I really want to get some idea, and I mean, I've been asking this question from many people, and yeah, it's not an easy question, and we do not have an easy answer to that. But yeah, so I would like to understand. uh, I am a early career researcher, and one question that keeps this question that keeps popping in my head is: we among researchers, activists, scholars, we keep talking about such issues, but if you look at the policy process, or if you look at the policies which are there, they keep moving in the very same direction. Instead, in spite of the humongous amount of work that has been done, critical works, critical voices from people as well as academicians, activists, scholars, and everyone. So, my question is, how do we think about bridging this gap as academicians, as researchers, as people from those communities, as people who are working with these people from communities who are directly related to rivers and other forms of resources or natural resources? So how do we even start thinking about this? How do we bridge this gap of this black box of policy making and this academia which is existing parallel to each other, and perhaps not speaking as much to each other as they should? So yes.
Thanks very much, Kanishka. Appreciate that question, and it is not an easy question. Let me invite our panelists to respond to that, and I'll also take this opportunity to request Hemavathi, Vaishnavi, and Prakash to comment on each other's presentations as well. I think it would be nice if at all you have any questions and comments to bring those in as well. But first, I think what we would like to invite would be your reactions or reflections or responses to our friend Kanishka's big question.
I can go first. Um, Thank you, Kanishka, for that very, very great, very important question. I think I'm going to. I'm having some internet connection issues, so I'm not able to switch on my video. Is that okay? Yeah. So I'm going to respond to this like from my own personal experiences and in terms of what I observed in Aghanashini. Personally, I think myself, like I've also been working in environment advocacy and research, and this is a question that you do think of a lot, that, you know, what happens after a campaign, like if there is a port or a mine and you're working towards challenging that, and you're successful, but then what happens after that campaign ends? So there is definitely a need for us as researchers to be involved in more initiatives of co-learning and working with communities towards also developing alternatives, like alternative solutions to these solutions of development that are being proposed. And in terms of Aghanashini, what I saw during the Tadati Port campaign was that there was some level of bridging of that knowledge happening between the researchers and the communities, where the communities were coming forward and talking about their traditional knowledge systems which were being documented, and they were being turned into, like, that was also being understood by the researchers in the area and the civil society organizations that were working there. And there were many, even the legal campaigns were actually taken forward by many paralegals in the community. So that kind of information flow happened because of the researchers in the area who helped in disseminating that legal and ecological knowledge as well, because there was a lot of misinformation with the communities as well, right? Like when the port had come and it was proposing to dredge in the sea, not a lot of people knew what dredging means, where, you know, you're literally taking out the silt from underneath the river bed, and they didn't know about that. So they had heard local rumors, and many fishermen over there thought that, you know, dredging will actually bring more fish into the sea. So that required that interaction with the ecological researchers at IAC who explained to them what dredging means and what kind of an impact it could have. So that was very important to the campaign as well. And I think there have been a lot of collaborations in terms of preserving the traditional systems that used to exist over there. Yeah, so I think the bridging is done through the interactions itself. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Vaishnavi. Yeah, I think as everyone acknowledges, this is not a question with easy answers, and I think it's always the success stories, the insights, the gradual change, the concessions that we can actually delineate from struggles that continue to inspire us to persist with this work. I mean, I just want to say that in every, I think, campaign or movement, there are these moments where it seems, to use a word that's very hot in the social impact sector, it seems like the needle has moved in a small way in the policy scape. And when that happens, that is a win. So I feel celebrating our wins, acknowledging them, and learning from them is part of the solution. I don't think there's any silver bullet solution to rethinking the mindsets and paradigms that policymakers operate with. Maybe Hemavathi, would you like to say something in response to the research, activism, and policy bridge or gap?
Thanks, Abhay. Yeah, just I want to echo part of Vaishnavi's thoughts in terms of access to information to locals themselves. Firstly, when it comes to policymakers, pushing for participatory decision-making process becomes very, very crucial. And for the locals to actually participate the way they are entitled to is also dependent on access to information. And such information can only, to a great extent be provided by academia. And most of my research, I've been inspired from the research conducted by Indian Institute of Science, like various levels, in-depth research. Even when you actually go through the public hearing, the document that has been minuted, you'll find that there are scientists who actually share information about what it actually means. Most of the time, when you talk about this decision-making process, and when the community is starting a movement against a project, there are so many barriers, say, including technology and language barriers. People from IIC were, from Karnataka, they could speak to the locals and, share their emotions. And they could also, to a great extent, I feel they have also been representative of the local communities themselves, despite being academicians. So I think academicians themselves are like a very big bridge between policymakers and the local communities, especially when there's a movement going on. Debating about conservation and development itself. But it also depends on how they choose to use their knowledge and research and resources, and which side they actually decide to take. Because when you talk about researchers, at least any information that comes from them is regarded with a certain level of importance, right? So ethic that again goes back to partially research ethics as a researcher themselves. Do you want to support the port and despite the fact that it's going to impact local communities, or do you want to actually stand by the side of local communities and protect their lives and livelihoods? So it's a very delicate thing, and positioning yourselves as an academician is going to tip the scales a lot. And I think we need to take that into consideration when researchers and academicians play this role on behalf of either the policymaker or the local community. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks very much, Hemavathi. Dr. Mesta, yes, I think we would love to hear from you. Given that you're also a part of the Biodiversity Board in Karnataka, you must have an interesting view on this.
No, estuary, always there is a huge biodiversity, rich estuary, and most of all estuaries have very rich biodiversity. And another one point out I want to point out, and even a dredge, the benthic on sediments also having good value. Valuable, it is very valuable. Most of company told that dredging materials dumped into the sea, Indian Ocean, Arabian Ocean, 30 kilometers. We asked them, the dredge material having the shells deposit. Aghanashini have a huge shell deposit, calcium carbonate, 99.9 pure ore it is. and they enormous amount of dredge material they discard. The sand also having value, good value, and silt also they are using for their blocks, and the shells also having that. We this information given we pass to the revenue intelligence. What they dredge material, they told it's a waste, but it's having the money, total money, dredge calcium carbonate, huge amount. This type of everything, every points we collected. What is the value of that waste, or what is the environment, how it damages, and benthic production, what happened to benthic production of the estuary? This everything we calculated. Then we represented before the any we have some information or documentation or calculation or publications along with that proof. It's a without any documents, we can't convince the government or any other organization or even fishermen also, or local community also. This is the right thing. We told them this is the thing. Aghanashini is so rich. Why you are you are the your family protected this. Why you destroy this? You keep this in for your future. This type of communication we tell local fishermen and local community, then they aware it and understand the what is the value. Everything there is no waste in the estuarine ecosystem. Everything have value. Either it's a commercially important, but it's a naturally or interrelated to different microhabitats or interrelated to other ecosystem of the estuarine different areas. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that's a great response to that question, which is it's always the research and the knowledge production finally is the evidence on which policymakers can be petitioned one way or the other. And apart from that, I think the process of research production itself is a reflexive process, right? Through research, one can also, in some sense, work with community, empower community. I'm reminded of Dr. Abhay Bang and what he says about research, right? It's not research on the people or research for the people, it is research with the people. And hopefully, as we research rivers and riverine communities, we learn from the communities, and through that process of researching, we also in some senses empower communities. Just as a story, because I'm a lawyer, I have these lawyer stories. So Professor Christopher Stone, who in 1972 actually wrote the famous article, should trees have rights, which in some sense started the Rights for Nature movement, at least in the English-speaking world. He, as an academic, made sure that the judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Douglas, who was listening to a famous environmental case, he made sure that the judge got a copy of his article just before the judge went to court to hear that case, right? And that led to, in that famous case, it was Sierra Club versus Morton, decided in 1972. It led to Justice William Douglas's famous dissent, which is nature has standing in courts, right? And so sometimes researchers have to do unusual things to change policymakers, including slipping them the research so that they are empowered to take decisions. And let's not believe that there are no good policymakers or good judges or good politicians. I mean, there's always that exception, as history has shown us. And I think the job of researchers is to give such people a basis to in some sense, change the system that is unjust or inadequate. I also am appreciating several comments from Vivek Negi that are in the chat box. I think quite useful to just characterize research. Let me, I think, slowly but surely coming to the end of our time, let me also invite some of the organizer colleagues in case you have a question or a comment. We do have time for it, so we definitely can make space for it. Dr. Chiranjeevi, I'm wondering if you're still in the room and if you'd be interested in saying something. Just given that you are representing the Nepal context as well, is there something that has come up for you through this webinar that you would like to share with our audience and those who might watch the recording later? Okay, maybe Dr. Chiranjeevi might not be able to speak now. As we just keep some space open for final questions or comments, we just have very few minutes left before our designated end time. Let me ask a sort of a provocative question to Hemavathi, Vaishnavi, and Prakash, which is, do you think talking about rights for rivers will actually make a difference? Do you think it's worth talking about rights of rivers or rights for rivers? Is that a move in a good direction, or do you think that is a distraction? Any thoughts on that would be, I think, this would be an appropriate place to begin to articulate that.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's nothing, I can't think of anything negative about having a movement for rights for the rivers, because I think ultimately, even looking at from a very, very selfish perspective of human beings and being greedy, protecting rivers is just ultimately one of those very important ways to protect ourselves, because we are a part of the ecosystem. And talking about it is definitely a very, very good start, but we shouldn't stop there. The fight is a very long one, at least until, say, for India, we have the courts or a specific law that actually recognizes the rights. Because when we talk about policymakers or the governments, unless it's recognized, our fight will only be restricted to protesting or having movements, as opposed to us having the capacity or the right itself to go to a court of law and to demand this. Right now, we can only ask for it, or demand in the sense that this should happen. But if the rights are actually recognized, we demand it as a matter of our own right as well. So yeah, it's a step in the right direction. Yeah, no negative about that at all.
Thanks, Hemavathi. Vaishnavi, Prakash, either of you all would like to go?
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Actually, the rivers, we are thinking about only harvesting, but there are several departments claim the rights on the estuarine part or rivers. There are more than 15 departments: forest department, mines and geology, agriculture, horticulture, like the poor department. There are so many departments claim their rights, but they not come across, not sitting in on the round table meeting how to manage the estuary. What is the estuarine management plan? But everyone invest in they collect what is the income of the estuary or rivers, what is the income. But some people have biodiversity managers. Everyone cannot do biodiversity management, but we must sit and discuss government officers of different departments who claims that this is our rights or this fishermen's coming under our department. We are the boss for that. This system, the management of the estuarine management plan is still not done nowhere in India. In Western countries, there is a plan for every estuarine uh, management plan for estuary or coastal ecosystem. These are India need that. Uh, this is the solution for for betterment of rivers. Rivers have their own rights. Every rivers is giving the several, not only human beings, several thousands and lakhs together creatures are depending on the rivers. We are thinking about only for human beings and their production and how we can earn the money or but so many organisms also, birds also, depending on the estuarine region or river. This is the message I want to tell, sir.
Thank you, sir. I think I really hear you loud and clear there. That's a beautiful way to think of why rights matter. And I mean, throughout history as well, initially it seemed absurd that, for example, women would have rights, right? If you go back to the original city-states of Greece, women didn't have rights. And then today, something like no rights for perhaps the more important of the genders would be, people would look on it as absurd. And even in India, I think, particularly with the 2014 decisions of the Supreme Court, the law of the country has recognized that we have to move away from an anthropocentric to an ecocentric perspective, which would recognize rights or interests of the more than human. And in our conversations on rights of rivers, we've had a lot of discussion on who should have the rights. Is it just the river? Is it the river basin? Is it the glaciers which lead to the river, or the lakes which lead to the river? Is it all the living life forms that are connected with the river, right? So the river itself is, I think, in some sense, a metaphor and a vital connective tissue for so much life, which would definitely, in some sense, benefit from a recognition of protectable or enforceable rights. Vaishnavi, would you have any thoughts on this matter of rights? Is it a good idea, bad idea? What's at stake here?
I think I'm still kind of introspecting into and understanding rights of rivers framework because I'm quite new to it. But in the context of Aghanashini, I think when I was going through the reports and the presentations, I feel like rights of rivers have, like, that knowledge has been with the communities for such a long time, and that there have been various movements for rights of rivers that have already taken place. So having the recognition of it could really benefit the future of the river, the estuary, and the communities living there, because this is something that they have constantly been putting forward, but because of not having any legal mechanisms in place which even have that understanding, and there is so much of like a conflict of the knowledge systems between laws, policies, and what is the way of the river and the estuary, which has been preserved by the communities in the region for such a long time. So I think the rights of rivers framework allows us to go back to those relationships of the river and the community, whether river was not, or the estuary was not seen from the lens of development or capitalist accumulation. And it's definitely a very important movement that needs to be contextualized and taken forward. However, I have like some questions in terms of its challenges in the current context, even in terms of Aghanashini, where there has been so much displacement, there has been so much division between the community. The entire idea of community itself is so segregated. As what Prakash Mesta talked about, it's very challenging because the resource use and access of the communities is very varied. Where at one point of time when this kagga cultivation was there and there was a very cooperative system between fishermen and farmers, they had their own sets of mechanisms and rules and mutual understanding. But at this point of time, there is a lot of division. So if we talk about Aghanashini and there is this rights of rivers framework and we do continue the conversations with stakeholders over there, how do we kind of bring together different like communities and and the positionalities and and their you know uh, uh, their access to the river as well? Like, how do we deal with these variations and the uh, identity conflicts as well amongst communities that are using the river? So I mean, that's something that I would also want to know, like in this context, how would we bring together different stakeholders to take forward rights of rivers?
Thank you. Thanks very much to all three panelists. So we are at the end of our time, and it looks like we are at the end of time just as things are getting interesting. Some comments are coming in and questions are coming in about the implementability, or the big question always when it comes to anything environmental in India, which is laws are good, rights are good, but how is it that implementation will happen, right? And I think that's always a good question. Let's talk about on the ground implementation. Let's not get caught up in a theoretical construct of a right or even a figment of a law unless we can actually realize that, which might mean the solution is in institutions and in education rather than new definitions. I think my colleague Shrishti has also raised a question complicating rights itself, right? Rights are often understood by many to be, in some sense, a European or Eurocentric concept of individual liberal rights, right? But is there space for a collective sense of rights? And maybe the Forest Rights Act in India might be a place to look at that, right? The idea of community rights or collective rights, which are not really in that sense reductionist or individual. My colleague Aisha, as we were preparing for this session, reminded me that yesterday the United Nations Human Rights Council has voted to have the right to environment, right to a clean and healthy environment as a fundamental right, right? And that is for humans, at least the environment has become a fundamental right. Interestingly, India abstained from that vote, right? Even though the Supreme Court has declared the right to environment as a fundamental right under Indian law, in the international context, India, along with China, Japan, and Russia, abstained from saying, yes, we want a right to environment as a fundamental human right. Right? And Vaishnavi, of course, gave us the complexity involved. Even within communities, there is no homogeneity. So, like any good session, I think let's take the questions back with us. Let's sit with them. Hopefully, this is the start of a conversation. You know who we are now, the Rights of River South Asia Alliance. Our website link has been shared. I'll request one of my colleagues to drop it again into the chat box, or I will. Please do join us. We are at end of time, so I'll request Shantanu to sort of send us on our way with a really quick thank you and goodbye. Over to you, Shantanu.
Thank you so much, Abhiraj. Hi, this is Shantanu here. So yeah, on behalf of the RoRSA team, I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants and all the panelists of this webinar for their presence and efforts and contribution. to make this webinar a successful one. And most of all, thank you so much for your work. As Abhay mentioned at the start of the webinar, that this is the first of the series of projects on rights of rivers by RoRSA, and we have few more amazing sessions planned for the future. Please follow RoRSA social media handles to stay tuned and informed and to get updates on future events. We'll soon have another event in which we'll share about another project and have another interesting sharing. We'll announce its date very soon. Hope to see you all there. Please feel free to get in touch with us if you need more information on RoRSA or rights of rivers. And lastly, thank you. Thanks everyone once again. Good night and take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much.